let's see, you've got foxglove, which is digitalis. It's used as a heart med. You overdose on that and it will kill you. They've got, I think there's a drawer with belladonna. They've got Cantharides beetles, which have you ever heard of the old more or less mythical aphrodisiac Spanish fly? It's an extract from a specific type of toxic beetle called Cantharides that they used to use it in artificial insemination. If you rubbed it on a bull's privates, it would get the bull up. The problem is if you go and pour some of that in somebody's drink, you're going to poison them. They'll basically die. They'll basically die in the middle of a humongous horrible seizure. But yeah, they've got a drawer with some of that. What's some of the other? There's a bunch of other stuff that's semi-beneficial, but it's really easy to overdose. Heck, in this period, you've got a recipe for something called a soporific sponge, which is you soak a sponge in this stuff, and then they breathe the fumes, and it knocks them out. It is descended from an orally administered, given by spoonfuls, one called Dwale in early Elizabethan times, that goes away fairly quickly because the wake-up rate was not optimal. It contained alcohol, opium, henbane, mandrake, belladonna, wild lettuce juice, and hemlock. And the recipe says, give it to a man by spoonfuls until he fall asleep, and you may carve on him as you need. Of course, the problem is with all that stuff, the difference between knocked out and dead is about a hair width. And then later on by this period, in the early 1600s, they're using a similar recipe, but people are just sniffing. You're just having them sniff the fumes. And that's still toxic enough that it's going to cause a lot of people to not wake up from the surgery. What you'll more typically find is they will take laudanum, opium, and alcohol, and just give a few small snorts until they get to the point where they're not going to knock them out, but it'll be down them out to, oh well, man, that hurts, and then you can operate on them, and then you give them a stick to bite on while they're. So you have them chewing on a bite stick while you're operating on them. And of course, you'll generally also have a bunch of their friends holding them down while you're doing the operation. If it's something really big and scary like an amputation, generally by the time you get to the bone saw, they would have passed out from the pain anyway. Back in England, of course, most of what I'm doing is shaves and haircuts, bleedings, purgings, pulling teeth, that sort of thing. Over here, I am doing a lot of things like digging foreign objects out of people. Occasionally people finding out that friendly fire isn't, musket balls and things. Stitching up a lot of cuts. If I can get the stuff, I'll have silk. Otherwise, I'll use anything from cotton to linen to hemp if I'm stuck with it, right down to horse hairs. Over here also, I might be dealing with concussions. Drilling skulls to relieve pressure off a concussion, and of course, your major trauma surgery, amputations, and so forth. This is all last resort stuff. That is, I'm not going to amputate unless it's a choice of life or limb. I'm not going to go poking a hole in someone's skull unless they've got a serious concussion, and I know it's drill or die. And in those cases, their odds of going into the operation, by the time you're showing subdural hematoma symptoms, you're already pretty close to dead. So if you survive the operation, then you've actually got a fairly good chance. Your odds of survival sort of go up exponentially the further you get from the traumatic incident, as long as somebody has drilled a hole in the skull and relieved the pressure. If they don't, the problem is that a lot of them don't make it through the operation, and that's because the symptoms don't show until you're almost dead. More mundane stuff: chamomile for upset stomachs, quinine for malaria. Now this one, the Brits don't get their hands on until about the 1650s. But that's something that over here in the New World you might run into a Spanish doctor who'd found out about and the Spanish find out about this stuff in about the 1500s. You know, they find out the natives are using this stuff for fevers. They try it on malaria, and here we are in the 21st century, and most of our anti-malarials are still quinine derivative. A lot of this, pretty much everything that I've got with me, there's a lot of oddball medicines going around. Some of the stuff is based on experience. Some of the stuff people have known for centuries that it worked. For example, white willow bark, which is essentially aspirin, has been documented at least as far back as Dioscorides, which is like 200 or 300 AD. On the other hand, you'll have other, lungwort being used for colds, and that's simply because the sort of lobe-shaped leaves of this plant look vaguely lungish, so they figure or liverwort, which is it's a root that looks sort of like a liver, so they figure that it might be. In other words, what you're seeing in some of these remedies is what we would now call magical thinking. Applying the magical law of similarity. If it looks like X, then it must work. You will still see this in a lot of hoax remedies nowadays. Have you heard of people trying to use shark cartilage to treat cancer on the grounds that sharks don't get cancer? A, they do, and B, injecting shark cartilage will just infect you with whatever germs the shark cartilage had in it and won't do a thing for cancer. But that is precisely the same type of thinking. That's magical thinking, and it's still being done today. Don't even get me started on vaccinations. I was having a
Wow. Some of the guitars, sometimes they'd have an octave on these, and sometimes they'd be single. I just decided to go ahead and do an octave on it this time. I'll probably change it back to a a single note later on. But it's just what I happened to have available when I was putting the strings on. You notice these are 4-course. They eventually went to 5-course before they had the regular 6-course guitar. And notice the size of these were much smaller for a woman to play. I think they're awesome. Neat sound, to look at. I'm working on this one still. I've been trying for years to get the right luthier to work with me on it. They're a little persnickety, these older instruments. This instrument here is the most popular instrument during the time of Renaissance. I'm going to get this, I have to tune this up later on in a little bit. But it was brought over from the Crusades, and it was called an oud originally. You see the back how it's shaped. It was they maintained the shape, and the neck was like this, the head. And the reason for that was because it would get the correct tension on the strings. And eventually, when they brought it back from England, from the Middle East, they only had like 4 strings on them, And I'm sure by the time they got it back on horseback after months and months of riding, the wife probably told them to fix that thing or get it out of the house. So the English couldn't leave anything well enough alone. They would added more strings and more strings until it got so they were like even double necks on these things, some of them. It just got ridiculous, and that's why it kind of went out of popularity until the Renaissance fairs came back, and historical groups like this to keep me happy because I get to come out and play my instruments sometimes. This is called a cittern. It was tuned up. It's got a really awful tuning for that time period. So I just found a note from a friend. I'm going to redo this whole thing again and change the layout on it so that it's a little more playable for modern ears. But it has a really funky sound. This is one of the first instruments played with strings that were steel and had frets that weren't movable, like on these instruments. Those are movable. And the only problem with steel strings with friction pegs is that it just doesn't like to hold them very well. But you notice that it's got a head on it. They always had a head on there. It was an animal or a human head or something. Some even put a little Diablo head on them. And that was because they would take it, if you look at the side of the building where you see those pegs hanging out, in the taverns they could just take a peg, put a string around it, and they'd hang the head on it, and it'd just hang there. So the tavern owner would buy one of these for a couple of bucks, hang it, of course they don't cost a couple bucks now, but they'd hang it there, and they'd have free music all day. You know, because people come in there and they pick it up and play it. Well, the upper class, the gentlemen and gentle ladies, quote and unquote, decided that they didn't like it because it was played in a tavern, and they called it the whore of the tavern because everybody had their hands on it. Which it was not a very popular instrument with the upper class, but it was popular in the taverns.
What did the upper class use?
The lute and the recorders and harps and a lot of instruments like that. The more the genteel instruments. However, they did have other instruments. They used occasionally a sham for dance, but always a drum. When you have a dance, you always have to have a drum. It helps everybody to keep in rhythm in dancing. Eventually this developed into the English gittern, which is not tuned right now, but it was tuned to an open C chord, C-E-G, C-E-G, which is nice because then you just play it and you go, 1, 4, 5. You got almost every song you want. You can add a finger configuration to do minors, which is great. George Washington bought one for his niece, Rebecca, in the 18th century, and there was one in Mount Vernon. They held on to these, and they became popular with the in Portugal later on when they quit making these. They still kept making these in Portugal. And what I like about these is they have the original tuners on there that you use a clock key. So you would put a string on, they have a loop on this end, and a loop here that would catch on here. And then you would let this clock key